All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is 4 mistakes to avoid when flipping your first property. My name is Sean McKay, and we are American IRA LLC. However, this is kind of one of those unique pieces of content we do, which is strictly for entertainment purposes. So always consult with your tax, legal, financial advisors. In this case, your realtors, your appraisers, and what have you, for kind of mechanics of how to properly go about flipping houses and things of that nature. So for those of you that are interested in using your retirement account to invest in real estate through different strategies, we are a phenomenal solution for you so that you can use your IRA or 401k to make real estate investments. Unfortunately, you can't use these retirement accounts to buy a personal residence for yourself or for your family. But from an investment perspective, we're a great option for you for a self-directed IRA or 401k. And so again, today is just a really quick hit, kind of a couple of things that those of us that are real estate investors have kind of learned the hard way throughout the years. So hopefully there'll be a little bit of value for you as we talk about some of the things, especially if you're just looking at getting into doing some real estate investing. And so I think that the target market is a good place to start when we're considering how to identify the right types of areas or properties that we want to fix and eventually sell to usually a retail buyer. And so one of the things that we want to do, again, when we're working with our team of realtors or communicating with other real estate investors, is we want to look really closely at days on market for a particular part of town or a particular neighborhood. And that's going to give us a really good feel for how quickly properties are selling in a certain area, which obviously if that's a hot market, the challenge is it's tougher to buy those properties. But once you find a good deal, you should have no trouble actually exiting and selling that property to somebody who's, for the most part, going to live in that property. And so when you're looking at these neighborhoods, at least the way I think about this is that you want to hit this kind of cross section, if you will, of an area that a lot of people can afford to buy a house, while simultaneously being an area where people would want to buy a house, right? Because there's obviously parts of any town where they're inexpensive, at least relative to other parts of town, but that may be for a particular reason. So it may be that it's crime ridden, or it's just not an aesthetically pleasing part of town. It's right next to some really kind of rough industrial type of companies or projects for the city. So again, it could be affordable, but maybe not where everyone wants to live. And then of course on the other end of the spectrum is many people would want to live in the most expensive parts of town, but for a lot of people that may not be affordable with their current income and what have you. So kind of trying to hit the meat of that bell curve, if you will, is usually a pretty good place to start. And so as we're thinking about kind of these acquisitions and these price points for properties, ultimately the safest type of fix and flip deal is going to be a property that in a worst case scenario could be what I consider kind of a hybrid property. So for example, if we're to buy a property, a house for, let's say, $250,000, that's going to need about $50,000 in work. And let's say that it takes a long time to get contractors in. There's certainly a labor shortage in a lot of cities. There certainly is in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so let's say that this takes a significant amount of time. What should take a month or two is taking 6 months, for example. And let's say that the market softens during that period of time, and you find that for whatever reason you're just not going to be able to make much profit in selling the house, or maybe the market really kind of tanks and there's just no way you can sell the house. So in that price point, in a lot of areas, you might be able to rent that house for $2,000 to $2,500. And so from a standpoint of being able to keep that property going, if you're able to get some good long-term financing with low interest rates, that is that is a tolerable, at least, outcome while the market is not where you want it to be. At 5, 10 years down the road, you might decide to turn around and sell that property, but you can kind of keep that property going in the meantime. Now, conversely, if you're doing a fix and flip on a million plus house, unfortunately, rents do not work commensurate with the price points as you get higher up that scale. So, for example, that the $300,000 house is going to rent for maybe somewhere around $2,500 a month. The $1 million house in a lot of areas is usually not going to rent anywhere close to $10,000 a month as you think about kind of a percentage of purchase price to rent values. And so that could be a pretty substantial drain on your cash flow. And so ultimately, that can be a much scarier flip to do if you're in a market that is softening, or just in general, it's just a riskier proposition there. So I would like to think that those that are doing kind of the higher end, at least in the Carolinas, a higher end fix and flip, that would be a scenario where you have a much better margin of profit on the deal. So if things go well, you do extremely well. If the market softens, you still have enough margin so that you can get in and out of that deal and still be okay. And so when you're thinking about pricing your properties, again, obviously I'm giving you some kind of conservative feedbacks. I have no idea what will happen in the market. Maybe the real estate market for the next 5 years just continues to go up, up, and up. Maybe tomorrow we're starting to see a pullback, at least in the Charlotte market, where we haven't seen that yet. I have no idea what's happening. But when we're looking at underwriting deals on the front end, I do find that many times in a hot market, people then do tend to kind of extrapolate the past into the future. So they're saying, okay, the last 12, 24 months have been incredible, huge appreciation. Maybe we're starting to see just this huge amount of inflation moving forward. And so I'll just be able to project ahead that in 6 months, my property is going to be worth another 10, 15, 20% from where it is in the market now. Certainly, that's a pretty dangerous game to play. I grew up in Florida. I was around for for us, it started in about 06, 07 collapse of the real estate market. And for other areas, it was more 08, 09. I've seen what happens when we kind of project ahead market trends, and that can be, again, a little bit risky there. So as we're thinking about the underwriting, let's not project ahead what we think values will be. Let's kind of assume that it's going to be essentially the current values. Also, when we're thinking about putting the house on the market to sell, there's a thought that if you were to slightly underprice the property when it goes on the market, there's the potential you could actually end up making more money when the property finally sells. So by that, what I mean is, we'll take that $300,000 house, for example. I've seen investors that will understand that, let's say the value when the property is fixed up is about $300,000. And they might price it at, let's say, $285,000. They have a bit of a bidding war, and instead of selling it for $300,000, they might end up selling it for $315,000, $320,000, et cetera. Of course, in that scenario, you want to make sure that it's going to appraise for your new buyers, or else they're many times not going to have the cash to be able to make up the difference between the appraised value and the sale value. But there are other circumstances where they can do that. So that's something that can be useful, and especially when you're underwriting the deal on the front end. If you think about it as a $285,000 house from a profit margin standpoint, that'll ensure that you're doing a safer deal. Because what we definitely want to avoid is kind of going the other end of the spectrum, where we're in a hot market. The $300,000 house, we're going to put on the market at $340,000 because we just feel like our house could potentially get that much. And the 340 sits there and it sits there, and then we have to drop it to 325. It's still sitting there. And, at this point, it's accumulating the days on market. It's starting to look like there's got to be something wrong with this property, because in a hot real estate market, whose properties sit on the market for any period of time, right? So just be really careful. Essentially, just don't get too greedy when you're working through your pricing there. And so as we think about the rehab on the property, we're all pretty much aware that kitchens and bathrooms will largely be the rooms of a house that will drive the most attention, especially from a female buyer. And statistically, female buyers do make up the majority of the buying decision when it comes to a primary house for a family. And so that's certainly not new information. What I do find surprising is where people take shortcuts when they're doing rehabs. And frankly, this is whether it's rental properties or property to sell. I find that they'll do a nice job overall with the rehab, but then they'll get kind of stingy with some of the finishes. Maybe they'll keep the existing vanity in a bathroom where for 500 bucks, maybe $1,000 they can get a phenomenal new vanity piece that really kind of makes that bathroom pop, makes it look like a much higher end bathroom, and of course will yield a better result from a kind of a value standpoint. Another huge one is there was always this idea for a number of years at least that stainless steel appliances were kind of nicer appliances. They were more high end looking, and so you would find that the nicer flips would have the stainless steel. And if you were trying to kind of cut corners on your budget, maybe you're throwing in the white or the black appliances, or maybe they're kind of mismatched. And at least in today's environment, the stainless steel appliances are really largely the same price point with many vendors, whether it's stainless, black, white. So, if stainless is perceived to be a nicer appliance, then it definitely makes all the sense in the world to go with that versus, again, kind of mismatched white, black, or, all white, all black. Um, so that's just personal preference, but something that just something to keep in mind, because I am surprised when people feel as though stainless steel appliances are twice as expensive as a white appliance or something of that nature. So just a little food for thought there. Also, I'm going to give you a bonus one here as I'm kind of loading up the webinar today. One of the things that hit me is the idea of contractors. We've spoken about how it's a hot market and it's difficult to get vendors. There's kind of a shortage of quality tradesmen. I submit to you that probably one of the best ways to find vendors is through relationships. So that could be relationships with other investors in town where they'll say, "Oh yeah, I got a great framer, I got a great painter, HVAC guy, whatever it may be." That's far better than bringing in 5 people that you don't know to give you bids, and then you're just either going to go with the low bid because it's less expensive. Sometimes you go with the high bid because you think, well, they're charging more money. They should know what they're doing. But ultimately, those relationship vendors do tend to pan out better. And if you do happen to have one great tradesperson, so let's say you have a great plumber, definitely ask them who they like working with on construction projects when it comes to the electrical, the painting, whatever the case may be, because usually the good crews are kind of together. And so that's a way to build your team as well as by working through other investors in town or the one or two good vendors that you do have and getting referrals for other trades. And so again, today was just kind of a quick hit. So hopefully there was something useful for you today. Again, I'm Sean McKay with American IRA. There's my contact info, Sean, SEAN at American IRA, or the office number 828-257-4949.